Hey guys, tonight we begin a slow descent into stillness, a journey through the subtle beauty of repetition. This isn't the kind of repetition that numbs or bores, but the kind that holds you gently in its rhythm. Think of the rising sun, the tide that always returns, or your breath, rising, falling, always there. This night, we're going to explore how the mundane can become meditative, how peace hides quietly behind patterns you've seen 1,000 times. You will not be able to control the world, but you can control yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the sound of the same alarm. That same patch of morning light rests on the wall. You move through your routine, not rushed, not sluggish, just the same. And for a moment, your mind starts to rebel. Another day just like the last. It whispers boredom, futility, that faint echo of existential sigh. But then something softens. You notice the way the coffee smells just as it did yesterday, comforting, grounding. You feel the warmth of the mug in your hand. You hear the birds, not the exact same ones, but close enough. And the tension between you and the world lessens. You are not in a prison of routine. You are moving inside a rhythm. This is the first paradox the Stoics understood. Freedom does not always look like novelty. Sometimes it feels like returning. The philosopher Cleans compared life to walking in a circle willingly, knowing that while the steps repeat, the soul deepens. There's a certain quiet power in doing the same things well, again and again. A soldier rethreads the same path to the watchtower. A farmer returns to the same field. A writer stares at the same blank page. And yet in each return something shifts, not out there but in here. You remember a time when you tried to escape the repetition, perhaps through distraction, through escape, through reinventing yourself endlessly. But you always came back to a simple truth. Your life is not built in grand gestures. It's shaped in repetition. And within that repetition, you have a choice: resent it or enter it with attention. It's like sweeping a floor. You've done it 100 times, but today when you sweep, you do it slowly. You feel the weight of the broom, hear the whisper of bristles on tile. It's no longer a task, it's a moment. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, woke each day to duties he didn't choose: wars, politics, betrayal. And yet, he wrote in his journal, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I am rising to do the work of a human being." Every morning, the same resolve. Every night, the same reflection. His repetition wasn't dull. It was devotion. You realize that you've been fighting your patterns as if they were enemies. But what if they are your allies? What if every repetition is a chance to refine not the world but yourself? The Stoics held tight to one idea: control what you can. That includes how you meet the ordinary, the unremarkable, the repeated. The truth is, novelty is easy. Growth through repetition, that takes strength. You feel your breath, one in, one out. You've done this 1,000,000 times, and yet here you are, alive in this one breath, fully, completely. Let that sink in. Now here's a curious thought. If each breath is both the same and never the same, could the same be said about each day? There's an ancient image that returns in Stoic texts: the archer. Not because of glory, but because of discipline. The archer draws the bow, releases, adjusts, and repeats. Every shot is the same. Every shot is different. The aim improves not in the novelty of action, but in the mastery of the repeated. So too do you aim each morning toward composure, toward presence, toward acceptance. You smile at the idea now, that the repetitive parts of your life, brushing teeth, folding clothes, walking the dog, may be the most sacred. Because in these acts you can show up fully. In these acts you can practice virtue without spectacle. No audience. No applause, just you and the task, just you and the rhythm. Some might say that this is settling. That peace in repetition is resignation. But that's only half true. It's not giving up. It's giving in to the flow of what is instead of the chase for what isn't. And here's your invitation tonight. Notice the loops in your life. Not to escape them, but to soften into them. Let them hold you like waves. Let them whisper, you are safe, you are steady, you are already in motion. Tomorrow, when the same alarm sounds, remember this moment. Remember that peace isn't hidden in the extraordinary. It's woven into the ordinary, one repeated thread at a time. You return to that memory, splitting firewood in the early morning chill. The axe rises and falls, rises and falls. At first it's work. Then it becomes something else entirely. The sound of the crack, the scent of pine, the rhythm of it all. You weren't trying to go anywhere. You were simply present inside the motion. The Zen monks call this chopping wood, carrying water. The Stoics, though less poetic, saw the same essence. Life is built of ordinary repetitions, and these repetitions are the stage on which virtue is practiced. You remember doing the dishes late at night. You didn't want to. You were tired. The sink was full. But something shifted when you just started, plate by plate, warm water, the smooth weight of the sponge. And slowly the frustration melted into something calmer. Not joy exactly, but ease. This is where the Stoic principle of living according to nature comes in. It doesn't mean living in the forest. It means aligning your actions with the flow of things, doing what must be done when it must be done without resistance. Folding clothes, cleaning up, tending to the small. These are not interruptions. These are the path. Epictetus, once a slave, knew this better than anyone. He could not choose his freedom, but he could choose how to respond to his daily burdens. And so, when ordered to do the same menial tasks again and again, he practiced patience. Attention, even joy, that is a kind of triumph few notice. And here's a strange truth. The more you resist repetition, the more it owns you. But once you enter into it willingly, it loses its teeth. You become part of it. You too begin to flow. Tonight you remember that long stretch of days when every hour felt the same, when life seemed like a blur of repetition. Wake, work, eat, sleep. And yet somehow you made it through. Not by breaking free, but by softening into it, like a stone becoming smooth in the river's current. There is a quiet dignity in doing the same thing well, again and again. But maybe your mind pushes back a little. Isn't that just settling? Isn't that giving up on spontaneity, on freedom? It's worth questioning. And yet you realize freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet decision to wipe the table with care, to make the bed before leaving, to eat without your phone. These tiny acts of repetition are not constraints, they are declarations of presence. You begin to see, repetition is not the opposite of freedom. Distraction is. In every repeated act done with awareness, you reclaim yourself from the noise of the world. The philosopher Seneca once wrote about rehearsing adversity, imagining hunger, poverty, loss, not to suffer, but to prepare. That too was a form of repetition, practicing discomfort so it wouldn't control him. Repetition, not for its own sake, but to build the self. And isn't that what you've been doing in your own quiet way? You cook the same meal for someone you love, not because it's exciting, but because it's meaningful. You sweep the floor not for praise, but because a clear space brings peace. You write the same kind of journal entry, not out of boredom, but because that's how clarity arrives. The Stoics remind you, repetition doesn't create stagnation. It creates space, for mastery, for self-discipline, for attention. And what is repetition really if not practice? You've practiced impatience before, frustration, escape. You've run those neural grooves deep, but tonight you get to choose what you practice. Maybe you practice stillness, or patience, or gratitude for small things done with care. It's like watering a plant. You don't see change after one pour, but day by day something grows. Not just the plant, but your own ability to care, to tend, to be gentle. And there's something almost humorous about it. You think you're just folding laundry, but really you're training your soul. The world will keep asking for your attention. Screens will flash, novelty will seduce, the next big thing will beckon. But here in the quiet you return to the simple truth. The peace you seek is not elsewhere. It's in your hands, right now, in this repeated motion. Breathe in, breathe out. You've done this 1,000 times, that's why it works. And as you lie there, listening, your body softens. You remember all the tiny repetitions you've done today, putting on socks, turning on lights, closing doors, brushing hair. Each one an unnoticed prayer. You've lived the day as you've lived many others. But this one you're noticing. This one you're letting it settle. Tomorrow you will chop wood again. You will carry water again. But maybe now you'll do it differently, not with resistance but with quiet purpose. After all, repetition isn't a sentence. It's a song. And tonight you're finally learning how to hum along. You picture him now, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of the Roman Empire, rising before dawn, not to plan wars or write speeches, but to write quietly to himself. His meditations weren't meant for others. They were repetitions, gentle reminders, notes to remember who he was, what mattered, and how easily one can forget both. You can almost see the wax tablet before him, the flickering flame at his side. Each morning, a man burdened with the weight of an empire returned to the same practice, stillness through reflection. That, too, was repetition. You think of your own mornings, perhaps less dramatic but no less human, the brush of water on your face, the way you sit in silence before the world wakes up, the first thought that enters, not always kind, not always calm, but real. And you try to meet it not with panic but with presence. This is what Marcus practiced and what the Stoics knew. We forget, so we return to our values, to our reason, to our breath, every single day. It might seem strange, even disappointing, that an emperor had to remind himself of the same things again and again, that he wasn't immune to pettiness, to anger, to self-pity. But that's precisely the point. Repetition isn't a sign of failure. It's the path to resilience. You've had to remind yourself too, haven't you? To be patient, to breathe before you speak, to let go of what you can't control. Sometimes it feels like you've learned these lessons only to forget them the next day. But that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. And in that humanity, the Stoics saw a reason to train, not once but daily. The same way an athlete stretches the same muscles, the same way a musician plays the same scales, the same way a good life is not built by revelation, but by repetition. There's a strange comfort in that, isn't there? That you don't need to be inspired every moment. You just need to return, and return again. The Stoics didn't promise bliss. They promised clarity. And clarity comes not in a single flash of insight, but in the quiet work of returning to your principles, especially when it's hard. Marcus wrote not because he had answers, but because he had questions. And rather than let those questions spiral into chaos, he held them gently and met them again with the same calm gaze. He reminded himself, "You are not harmed by what happens, but by your opinion of it." He reminded himself, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Every morning, every night, this might feel redundant. But so is brushing your teeth. So is checking in with someone you love. So is placing your phone on silent. So is walking your dog. And yet, you know what happens when you skip those little things. You forget. You drift. You become reactive. You lose the center. So you return. That's the Stoic practice. Not to never fall, but to keep rising. Not to always feel calm, but to keep choosing calm again and again. You smile now, remembering a time you lost your temper over something small, a delayed message, a misheard word, and later the regret. But maybe what mattered wasn't that you slipped. It's that afterward you sat down, breathed deeply, and told yourself, "Next time slower." That was you writing your own meditation. That was you becoming like the emperor, not in power but in practice. There's a certain humility in this repetition. It admits, "I am not above forgetting." But there's also strength, because every time you return, the groove gets a little deeper, the path a little clearer. And here's a question the Stoics never answered fully, because maybe it isn't meant to be answered. If we could remember once and for all, would we even need to live? Maybe repetition isn't a flaw of life. Maybe it is life. A spiral that brings us back to the same truths, seen through slightly different eyes. You tonight, listening in the dark, are not the same person you were yesterday. And yet, here you are, meeting the same truths again. That you can't control the world, that you can control your mind. That peace is possible. You feel a warmth growing in your chest. It's not excitement, it's steadiness. You think of Marcus Aurelius again. Not on the throne, but at his desk, alone. A king of the known world, whispering to himself like a child trying to stay kind. You understand him now. Tomorrow, maybe you'll write something down too, not for anyone, not to be profound. Just to remember who you are and what you wish to return to. That is not weakness. That is the work, so let yourself repeat. Not in circles that go nowhere, but in spirals that rise. And in the stillness of tonight, perhaps you can already feel it. You've returned, again and again. And it was enough. It starts with a sigh, that slow, subtle exhale you give when the world feels stale, like everything's been done before. The same conversations, the same commute, the same old tasks waiting for you tomorrow. You stare at the ceiling, eyes tracing invisible lines, and a whisper inside says, "This again." But tonight, let's sit with that sigh. Let's not run from the boredom, because something sacred might live just beneath it. The Stoics never saw boredom as a problem. They saw it as a mirror, uncomfortable, yes, but honest. When you feel bored, it's not because life lacks meaning. It's because your mind is craving stimulation, novelty, excitement. And that's okay. But it's also an invitation. Can you stay just a little longer with the stillness? This is the paradox. Boredom, when held gently, transforms into presence. You recall a moment not long ago. You sat waiting at a bus stop maybe, or in a quiet waiting room. No music, no phone, just you. At first, the silence itched. But then something shifted. You noticed your own breath, the texture of your thoughts, the rhythm of footsteps nearby, and you were there, really there, for the first time in hours. Presence is hidden in the moments you want to escape. That's why the Stoics practiced sitting in quiet, not to achieve anything, but to be. To notice the world as it is without needing it to entertain. Seneca once wrote that people flee into travel, possessions, and distractions, but wherever you go, you bring yourself. And if you haven't made peace with yourself, the journey never ends. The boredom always returns. You chuckle softly at the truth of it. How many times have you picked up your phone not out of need, but out of sheer habit? How often have you opened a tab, scrolled through feeds, only to feel emptier than before? The Stoics would say, don't numb that emptiness. Listen to it. Let it speak. It might tell you that you've forgotten how to sit still, that you've confused stimulation with meaning, that your attention, so often scattered, is craving an anchor, and that anchor might be something beautifully repetitive. Maybe it's a walk you take without your phone, just once. The same block, the same steps, but this time you notice the way the wind brushes the trees, the way your foot lifts and lands. You feel it not with thought but with your body. Suddenly, repetition isn't boring, it's grounding. Think of a child who asks to hear the same bedtime story every night, not because they forgot the ending, but because repetition makes the world feel safe, predictable, held. You too long to be held by something predictable. And you can be, if you let yourself rest in the now. Repetition teaches that the present moment is not empty. It's full of details you miss when you rush, when you chase. There's a lightness that comes when you stop needing life to surprise you, when you allow the familiar to be enough. And here's a twist. The more you lean into repetition, the more subtle variation you start to see. The third time you hear a song, you notice the harmony. The fifth time you walk a path, you spot a crack in the sidewalk. The 10th time you make tea, you feel the steam hit your skin just right. Nothing changed. You did. Repetition reveals slowly what novelty hides. There's a reason Stoics practice daily reflection. The same questions over and over. What did I do well? What could I improve? What was out of my control? Not because they loved rituals, but because they knew insight grows in layers. And layers take time. This is the quiet rebellion of a Stoic, to meet boredom with attention, to choose presence when the world offers you escape. And maybe tonight you're already feeling it, that strange softening, the gentle hush that settles when you stop demanding the world entertain you, when you let the moment be plain, repeated, and enough. You remember the rhythm of your breath, the quiet weight of the blanket on your legs, the hum of your own thoughts slowing. Some might say boredom is a sign of a dull life, but you're beginning to see the opposite. It's a gateway, and you have the key. So tomorrow, when the silence stretches and the itch to scroll returns, maybe you pause. Maybe you watch the kettle boil just once and let it teach you. That peace isn't on the other side of boredom. It's hiding inside it, waiting. You're standing at the kitchen sink. It's evening and the sky outside has turned the color of old paper, soft, fading, familiar. You've been here before, maybe 100 times, a plate in one hand, a sponge in the other. Water runs warm over your skin, nothing dramatic, just the simple act of washing. You think at first there's nothing special about this, but then something shifts. The smell of soap, the clink of porcelain, the rhythm of your hands. You're not thinking of what's next. You're not rewinding what came before. You are simply here. You are weaving your life from small things. The Stoics believed in action, but not grand, world-shaking acts. They spoke often of the daimon, the inner guide that nudges you toward virtue. And where does the daimon whisper loudest? Not on battlefields or in speeches, but in the tiny, often invisible choices. You pick up the next dish. Rinse, dry, stack. 1,000 days might pass like this, but that doesn't mean they're meaningless. It means they're sacred, because meaning is not something given by the universe. It's something made with your own two hands. Marcus Aurelius wrote that life is composed of little tasks, that we must do what is in front of us with precise and genuine seriousness, that even the smallest duty can be a thread in the larger fabric of your character. And you see it now, don't you? You've always thought you'd become yourself in some great moment, but you're becoming yourself here, in this room, with this towel, through this motion. It's easy to overlook. We're conditioned to believe life happens in highlights, the vacation, the promotion, the revelation. But the Stoics would ask, what if the soul is shaped not in the fireworks, but in the folds? You remember watching someone fold clothes once. Maybe your mother, maybe a stranger, but the memory lingers. There was something meditative in it, not rushed, not careless. Each shirt pressed gently, each pair of socks matched with care. There was love in the repetition, and repetition, when done with love, becomes devotion. There's something strangely humorous in how we rush through tasks trying to get back to life, not realizing these tasks are life. The broom in your hand, the laundry in the basket, the spoon clinking against the bowl. This is where your character is rehearsed. The Stoics would remind you, virtue is not abstract, it's embodied. Courage might be choosing not to snap at someone when you're tired. Temperance might be washing the dishes without complaint. Wisdom might be knowing the work won't end, but doing it anyway. And you wonder, if you approached each repetitive task with presence, what would happen? Not to make it productive, not to squeeze meaning out of it, but to let it be what it is, to meet the moment on its own terms. Suddenly, the act of sweeping becomes more than cleaning. It becomes grounding. The brushing sound of bristles becomes your heartbeat. The pile of dust, a reminder that all things pass and you're allowed to let them go. Even your thoughts become lighter in these moments. Have you noticed? When your hands are busy with the simple, your mind finds stillness more easily. A kind of hush. You think of the Stoic idea of cosmic reason, the belief that the universe unfolds with order and that your small part in it matters. Washing dishes might not seem cosmic, but you begin to wonder, what if this moment is exactly where you're meant to be? Some might argue that repetition numbs the soul, but here's the paradox. Done with awareness, it awakens it. The weaving of small acts creates the texture of a life well lived. And tonight you notice how much you've already woven, quietly, without applause, the meals prepared, the kindnesses offered, the emails answered, the messes cleaned without being asked. These, too, are your legacy. Not because others saw them, but because you were there for them. You feel the dish in your hand now as if it were real, tangible even in the dark, smooth, warm, a symbol of care. And maybe tomorrow you'll wipe the counter differently, not rushed, but with presence. Because now you know every motion shapes the soul, every repetition a form of prayer. You are the weaver, and the thread is already in your hands. The room is quiet now. You sit cross-legged on the floor, or maybe you're lying still, the way your body prefers when there's nothing to perform. The clock ticks. A faint breeze nudges the curtain, and you begin to notice the rhythm of your breath again. In, out, like waves, or seasons, or stars circling their ancient paths. You've felt it before, that strange sensation when time seems to lose its edges. When repetition doesn't mark the end of creativity, but the beginning of something deeper. The Stoics didn't meditate as monks do now, but they understood the value of circling back. Back to your breath, back to your principles, back to the present moment, over and over, because there's nowhere else you truly belong. And here you are returning. You've sat in silence before and thought, what now? You waited for answers, for insights, for something to happen. But what if nothing needed to? What if the happening is the returning? Tonight you are circling within circles. It might sound strange, but the Stoics believe the universe itself moves in cycles, birth and decay, rise and fall. Even the stars, Marcus wrote, are spinning in their own rotations. And if the cosmos can dance in circles without complaint, perhaps you can too. You notice how the mind resists this. It wants progress, a destination, a clear arc. But life is rarely a straight line. It's more like a spiral staircase. You may return to what looks like the same place, but you're seeing it from a slightly different height. That's what repetition offers, not a trap, but perspective. You remember a time you returned to an old book, one you thought you'd exhausted, but on the second reading something changed. A phrase leapt out, a truth struck deeper. Why? Because you had changed. And now the repetition wasn't sameness. It was revelation. The Stoics would call this the evolution of the inner citadel, the part of you that remains untouched by the world but can be shaped by reflection. That part is built brick by brick, moment by moment, breath by breath. And what a curious paradox it is. The more you circle inward, the more expansive you feel. Some philosophers, Heraclitus for instance, spoke of constant change, that you never step in the same river twice. The Stoics agreed but added, even if the river changes, you are the one returning, and in that return there is strength. Tonight you might find yourself looping in thought, the same memory, the same fear, the same question. Let it loop, but meet it this time not with frustration but with softness. Ask it gently, what are you teaching me by returning? Perhaps it's patience, perhaps acceptance, perhaps the art of not needing to solve everything. There's a story of Zeno, the founder of Stoicism. After losing everything in a shipwreck, he found himself in Athens, wandering into a bookshop. There, he discovered philosophy. He later wrote, I made a prosperous voyage when I suffered shipwreck. Life had circled him right where he needed to be. That's the strange humor of it. Sometimes the loop is a gift. And when you start to see that, you loosen your grip on linear progress. You stop measuring your worth by how far you've gotten. Instead, you start asking, how deeply have I returned? The breath comes back. The heart beats again. The thoughts rise and settle like the tide. Nothing new. And yet everything is new because you're finally here for it. You laugh quietly. You've chased so many answers, climbed so many ladders. And yet here in the circle you find something better than arrival. You find rhythm, harmony, a pulse that doesn't demand applause, only presence. And so you sit, not to escape, but to re-enter, to fall in sync with the deeper pattern, to realize your life has never been off course. It's simply been spiraling inward, inviting you home. You breathe again, not because you must, but because now you want to. You're holding a pen, or maybe your fingers hover above a keyboard. The room is still. Outside, the world moves as always. Cars hum by, dogs bark in the distance, time slides quietly forward. But in here you've opened a space for reflection. And so you begin to write, not for others, not to impress, but simply to return. You don't even know what you'll say yet. It doesn't matter. The act is the point. You're writing letters to no one. The Stoics had their journals, private dialogues with the self. Marcus Aurelius never meant for his meditations to be published. They were reminders, anchors, lines of reasoning scribbled in the quiet, not to prove he was wise, but to keep himself from forgetting. You write as he did, perhaps without realizing it. You jot down your thoughts, frustrations, hopes, questions that won't resolve themselves tonight, and in doing so you clear a space in your mind. As if each sentence you write carries a stone away from a crowded path. You might begin with something simple: "Today was hard," or "I lost my temper again," or even "I don't know what I'm doing." And suddenly you're not spiraling inside. You're laying it down, making sense of it, letting it breathe. This, too, is repetition. You don't have to be a philosopher to write. You just have to be willing to meet yourself. And the beauty is, you can meet a different self each time. Some nights you write as the observer, cool, rational, untouchable. Other nights your sentences tremble with emotion. But each time you return, you trace the edges of your becoming. The Stoics taught self-inquiry as discipline. Not emotional indulgence, but clarity. What did I do today? Was I in control of my reactions? What did I fear and why? These weren't punishments, they were lanterns. They illuminated the hidden patterns of mind. There's something almost funny about it. You could spend hours talking to others, but how often do you talk to yourself? Not out loud, but on paper. And when you do, you realize how strange, contradictory, and sometimes wise you actually are. This is how you uncover the scaffolding of your character. Not all at once, but slowly, repetitively, like shaping clay. You remember a time you found an old notebook of yours, a journal from years ago, and you barely recognize the voice in it. So much worry over things that never happened, so much grasping, but also tenderness, a deep wish to grow. You smile at that past version of yourself, and maybe, just maybe, you felt proud. The act of writing reveals change that no mirror can show. The Stoics were practical. They didn't ask for perfection. They asked for commitment, a willingness to engage the mind again and again, even when nothing seemed to change on the surface. Epictetus told his students, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." But how do you know if you are? You check in, you write, not to narrate your day like a diary, but to observe the self that showed up, to name your impulses, to ask if you acted with reason or reaction. This kind of writing is different from storytelling. It's slower. It unfolds sideways. It's not meant to entertain, but to expose. And once it's on the page, you can look at it with compassion. You can see that you're trying, not always succeeding, but always returning. You're practicing self-accountability, but also self-acceptance. A strange kind of peace rises in this space. Not triumph, not excitement, just calm. Like dust settling. You put down the pen, not because you're finished, but because for tonight that's enough. Maybe tomorrow you'll return to the same page or start a new one, but now you understand. The value is in the repetition, not the outcome. You're not writing to find something perfect. You're writing to find something true, and in doing so you become a little clearer to yourself. That's more than enough. That's everything. The flame is small. A candle on the table, a soft glow in the corner of your room. It doesn't shout, it doesn't flicker dramatically, it just burns steady, quiet, present. You watch it maybe without meaning to. The way the wax pools gently, the way the wick bends toward the light. And you think, without needing to put it into words, that this is how peace works. It doesn't arrive in thunder. It's something you tend gently day after day. The Stoics often used the metaphor of fire, a fire that burns within, not a roaring blaze, but a controlled, enduring heat. Epictetus called it your proherses, your faculty of choice, your ability to respond with reason even when life flares unexpectedly. And like any fire, it requires tending. Tonight you tend it, not by doing something extraordinary, but by showing up again, by sitting in stillness, by breathing, by choosing calm, not because you have to, but because you can. You remember the times when your flame flickered, When something small, a comment, a delay, a mistake, threatened to extinguish your peace, and maybe it did for a while, you snapped. You shut down, you spiraled. But then, perhaps without realizing it, you returned. To silence, to breath, to reflection. You brought the match back to the wick, and that's the lesson the Stoics tried to teach. You will lose your calm, you will fall short, but you can always relight the fire. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When jarred, return at once to yourself." A phrase he repeated often, not to shame himself, but to remind himself that peace is a practice, not a possession. And tonight, your practice is this: to sit beside the flame, to feel its warmth without needing it to grow bigger, to be with your inner fire, not to control it, but to honor it. It's funny, isn't it? How easily we overlook the steady work of being. How we chase intensity, more passion, more goals, more breakthroughs, thinking that's where the power lies. But the Stoics would say, your true strength is in your constancy, not your brilliance. Your steadiness, that's what the candle teaches. You think of the monks who light candles as part of a daily ritual. The repetition isn't for the candle's sake, it's for the soul. It's a reminder: return, breathe, begin again. This isn't about spirituality, it's about sanity. In a world that burns so loud and fast, you become a rare kind of flame. The one that stays lit not because it's protected, but because it's practiced. You chuckle gently. Imagine explaining to someone, "I'm practicing my inner fire by washing dishes, by breathing slowly, by not reacting to emails." It might sound absurd, but it's real, it's powerful, and it's yours. That's the paradox. Your greatest peace doesn't come from escape. It comes from repetition, from showing up to the same task with new presence, from doing the same act, but this time choosing calm. You think now of a hearth in an ancient home. Firewood placed each morning, ash cleared each night. No one thanks the fire for burning, but without it nothing warms. Your peace doesn't need applause, it just needs tending, and when you neglect it, it dims. Not out of spite, but because that's how fire works. So tonight you tend, you soften your breath, you let the thoughts pass without pulling at them. You light the metaphorical candle again, not because you've failed, but because you are faithful. Repetition is not punishment, it's devotion. The Stoics knew this, that the fire of your character isn't lit once, it's fed daily, through restraint, through action, through awareness, through rest. You might forget again tomorrow, but now you know the way back. And when your light wavers, remember this moment. Remember the quiet, the soft glow, the still air. You are tending the fire, and it is enough. You wake up, maybe not from sleep, but from distraction. A momentary flicker of attention as you catch yourself mid-thought, mid-scroll, mid-rush. It happens quietly, almost imperceptibly. And then, suddenly, you're here again, back in the moment. That is the miracle of returning. And perhaps it's not dramatic. Perhaps you didn't reach enlightenment or stumble upon some grand epiphany. Perhaps you just noticed your coffee had gone cold, or that the sun had shifted across the wall. And in that noticing, you were alive again. The Stoics held this quiet kind of awakening in high regard, because they knew the truth: we forget ourselves, often, easily. But the measure of our practice isn't in how long we stay aware, it's in how gently we come back. Over and over. You remember Epictetus teaching his students that philosophy wasn't something to be understood once, but practiced daily, hourly, even. He didn't scold forgetfulness. He expected it. But he encouraged readiness, a kind of mental posture that allows you to notice when you've strayed and to return without shame. You may have walked far from yourself, but you're always one breath away from being back. That's the heart of repetition. It's an invitation, a path always open, a doorway that never closes even when you forget it's there. You smile now, thinking of how often you've made the same mistake, said the same thing you promised not to, thought the same unhelpful thought. And yet here you are, not broken, not beyond repair, just human and still willing to return. This too is your practice, and it's oddly beautiful the way you keep trying, not with fanfare, but with quiet resolve. You notice it in the way you speak to yourself now, a little softer, less judgment, more curiosity. You're learning to be with your mind, not against it. The Stoics would call this progress, not a straight line but a winding path walked with patience. You think now of the idea of ataraxia, the calm tranquility of a soul undisturbed. It's not a constant state. It's not permanent peace. It's the ability to return to equilibrium even after chaos, like a pond that settles after a stone. The surface smooths again, not because nothing was disturbed, but because stillness knows how to find itself. So do you. You return when you pause before reacting. You return when you put down your phone in the middle of a scroll. You return when you look up, just for a moment, and remember the sky is still there, patient as ever. And sometimes you return through laughter. That moment when you realize how seriously you were taking something trivial and you chuckle. That too is a return, a kind of spiritual exhale. The Stoics loved this kind of humility. They never took themselves too seriously, not because they were careless, but because they saw how small most things are when held against the vastness of time and nature. Does this matter? They would ask. Or am I just caught in a loop? And sometimes the answer surprises you. Sometimes the drama evaporates with a single breath. You look at your day now, perhaps one that felt unremarkable, the small irritations, the little wins, the dishes, the traffic, the waiting, it repeats. But you begin to see something inside that repetition, opportunities to return, and each return is a thread, a stitch in the soul, a turning toward what matters. Even now, as you listen in the stillness of the evening, you are practicing it. You've turned down the volume of the world to hear something softer. You've said to yourself, there must be a gentler way. And there is, you just forget, and then you remember. And that, dear listener, is enough. So keep forgetting, keep remembering, keep returning. The path doesn't punish you for stepping off. It simply waits for you to step back on. And the more you do, the more you trust it's always there. Like the breath, like the flame, like the sky, waiting. There's a knock at the door, not literal maybe, but internal. A subtle tap from your conscience. A whisper, have you followed through? Not in the sense of grand achievements, but in the quieter sense. Did you do what you said you would? It's one of the simplest and hardest Stoic questions. Do your actions match your values? Tonight you examine that, not to judge but to witness. Because repetition without integrity becomes performance, but repetition with integrity becomes transformation. You think back to a promise you once made. Something small, maybe to get up early, to be more patient, to put your phone away after 9 p.m. And for a while you did it. You showed up. You honored your word until you didn't, and then you let it slide. And maybe for a time you didn't notice, but now you do. That's what makes this moment powerful. You've remembered. You've come back to the part of you that wants to be aligned. And it stings a little, not out of guilt, but because you care. Marcus Aurelius asked himself daily, are my actions just? Am I doing the work of a human being? And he wasn't always satisfied with the answer, but he returned to the mirror each day, not to admire, but to see. You hold up that mirror now. Have you lived today in harmony with your deepest values? Not perfectly, not heroically, just honestly. You begin to notice how repetition, when unconscious, can lead you astray. It's easy to repeat patterns that dull you, reaching for distractions, deflecting emotions, procrastinating your priorities. These, too, are repetitions, but they don't have to define you. You can rewrite the pattern slowly, deliberately, and yes, repetitively. Like the craftsman who carves wood grain by grain, you begin again. You think of a story, a tailor in an old city, famous not for speed but for precision. He stitched by hand, measuring each piece twice, cutting slowly. Customers often waited weeks, but when they wore his clothes, they felt right, as if something in the patience of his process had transferred into the fabric. You realize the pace of repetition matters. When rushed, it breeds carelessness. When done with presence, it becomes a craft. So tonight you ask, what kind of life am I crafting, stitch by stitch? The Stoics remind you it's not about massive changes overnight. It's about the return to right action. Each time you notice you've drifted and gently bring yourself back. You feel it now, that steadying, that recentering. You might not have followed through today, but you can tomorrow. And the promise doesn't need to be big. One mindful breath before you speak. One act of kindness not posted, not praised. One moment where you pause instead of push. These are not gestures, they are threads, and each one adds to the tapestry of your integrity. You smile a little. Maybe you've been hard on yourself. Maybe you've measured progress with someone else's ruler. But the Stoics would invite you back to your own standard. Not comparison, not image, but your reasoned choice. That's your compass. And it always points true north if you're quiet enough to listen. You picture it now. Not a flashy path, but a well-trodden one. The kind of trail made by steady footsteps. Dusty, maybe. Worn in places, but honest. That's the kind of life repetition can build, not perfect, but aligned. And here in the quiet of this moment you begin again. No grand declaration. No sudden breakthrough. Just a quiet promise to follow through once more. And tomorrow, the same. Not because you have to, but because you can. There's a moment, somewhere between tired and awake, where everything softens. The edges blur. Your body begins to sink. And in that in-between space, something tender happens. Your defenses drop. The parts of you that push and posture during the day no longer feel necessary. What's left is something more honest, a quieter version of you. And from this space, you begin to see the truth the Stoics always pointed toward. You're not in control, not fully, not of other people, not of timing, not of how things unfold, and that's not a threat. It's a doorway to peace. You think now of all the energy you've spent trying to manage what isn't yours to hold, the moods of others, the outcome of your work, the pace of your growth. It's exhausting, isn't it? Like trying to hold back the tide with your bare hands. The Stoics would say, drop it, not in despair, but in clarity. There's a deeper strength in knowing what's yours and what isn't. That's why they practice the dichotomy of control, not as a rigid doctrine, but as a tool, a gentle sorting of the soul. Is this within me or beyond me? A question you can ask at any moment. And the more you ask, the more you free yourself. It's not passivity, it's precision. You control your effort, not the result. Your attitude, not the behavior of others. Your response, not the chaos. That's why Stoics train themselves to come back, not just to breath, but to boundaries. Internal ones, quiet ones. And you've felt it, haven't you? That sensation of release when you realize a burden isn't yours. When you stop rehearsing that conversation in your head. When you stop rewriting the past. When you exhale and let it be. That's not giving up. That's waking up. And like all meaningful things, it happens through repetition. Each time you feel the tension rise and remind yourself, this is outside my control. Each time you pause before reacting and choose serenity instead of panic. Each time you refuse to carry what was never yours to begin with. You begin to feel it now, like warm water washing over your hands, letting go again and again. The Stoics weren't cold. They weren't emotionless. They simply understood that grasping at the uncontrollable leads to suffering. So they practiced release, not once but daily, like the breath, like a mantra, let it go. You might recall a moment where something didn't go your way, a plan that unraveled, a message left unread, a situation you couldn't fix. And yet, after the initial sting, there was a strange peace in acceptance. That's not resignation. It's resilience. You're not giving up on effort. You're giving up on attachment. There's a lightness in this. Like placing a heavy bag down after miles of carrying it. You don't need to predict everything. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to return to the part of you that knows what's truly yours and what isn't. It sounds simple, and it is, but it's not easy. That's why we forget, and that's why we repeat. The Stoics didn't write their truths once and move on. They repeated them over and over because forgetting is human, and remembering is a practice. So tonight you practice. You whisper to yourself, not my responsibility, not within my control, but this moment is mine. You feel it now, the calm beneath the chaos. You don't need to control everything. You just need to stay with what's yours, and let the rest drift gently away, like leaves on water, carried by the current, freed by your release. You find yourself walking, not anywhere in particular, just moving. Maybe it's in your mind, or maybe it's real through your neighborhood, around your room, down the same old hallway, one foot after another, the same rhythm, heel, ball, toe. Step, step, step. You're not trying to get somewhere, you're simply in motion. And somehow that motion feels like clarity. The Stoics loved walking. It wasn't just exercise, it was philosophy in motion. They believed thought deepened when tethered to movement. Seneca often wrote letters while pacing. Epictetus, too, was said to walk slowly during conversation, giving ideas space to breathe between steps. You notice it now, don't you? How movement slows your mind. How repetition, each footfall like a heartbeat, begins to soothe the inner chatter. That's not an accident, it's alignment. You've spent so much of your life chasing forward motion. Big leaps, bold strides. You've been taught to worship momentum. But this steady repetition is something gentler. It's returning disguised as progress. Because even when the path is familiar, your awareness can change. Today's walk is not yesterday's. Not if you're truly present. You begin to notice things, the shift in air, the brush of fabric, the rhythm of your breath syncing with your steps. The body becomes its own kind of mantra. And this, too, is a Stoic practice. To move with awareness. To walk without rush. To carry your mind with you. You smile, thinking of how often we forget we have a body until it hurts. The Stoics urged mindfulness of the body, not for vanity but as a reminder. You're not just a thinker. You are physical, grounded mortal. This step, this breath, this heartbeat, that's reality. Everything else is speculation. The humor, of course, is that we're often so distracted in our bodies, we bump into things while thinking about the future. We walk while mentally elsewhere. But when we return to the feel of the floor, the swing of the arms, the gravity beneath our feet, we remember we're alive. You think now of the ancient porticos where Stoics once walked and taught, places where the architecture itself invited slowness. Covered walkways, quiet corridors, as if the buildings understood truth needs space to unfold. And here you are walking your own corridor of repetition, not to arrive, but to be. There's something powerful in this. Something oddly defiant in choosing slowness in a world that idolizes speed. You walk your path, not because it's efficient, but because it's yours. You think back to an ordinary walk you took once. The weather was unremarkable. The route was familiar. But something happened. You had a thought, a tiny realization, maybe about someone you loved, or a regret you had been carrying. It came uninvited, like a leaf falling across your path. And you remember. Movement invites memory, not by force, but by rhythm. That's the gift of repetition. It creates the conditions for reflection. And reflection creates the opportunity for release. So you keep walking. And with each step you leave behind what no longer serves. You feel it even now, the quiet shift within, like dust settling, like a weight lifted. You're not sure when it happened, somewhere between one step and the next. But it happened. Not through struggle, but through motion. The Stoics would nod at this. They knew that wisdom rarely arrives with a crash. It arrives like a step in an old hallway, a return to something you already knew but needed to feel again. You pause now, just for a moment, and in that pause you notice you're here fully. And when you begin walking again, it won't be out of habit. It'll be with intention, step, breath, peace. You find yourself facing the same old frustration. Maybe it's a thought you've had 1,000 times, or a situation that won't resolve. A person who keeps being who they are, no matter how much you wish they'd change. And you feel it again. That tightness in your chest, that mental loop spinning faster than you'd like. It's tempting to think, haven't I already dealt with this? And yet here it is, again. But tonight, instead of resisting it, you pause, you look at it differently. You remember what the Stoics taught. Life doesn't change just because you've seen something once. You change by seeing it again, more clearly. This is the deep work of repetition. Not just outer action, but inner revisitation. What if the frustration isn't a setback? What if it's a teacher, repeating the lesson until you're ready to understand it more fully? Epictetus compared the mind to a garden. If you leave it alone, weeds grow. If you tend it occasionally, weeds still return. But if you tend it daily, consistently, you shape its growth. That's the choice you have now. To tend even when the same weed appears. To practice presence even when the moment feels stale. You smile gently at the irony. You've grown angry at your anger. You've grown tired of your exhaustion. But underneath that fatigue is something sacred, a chance to meet the moment more wisely than the last time. You recall a conversation that didn't go the way you'd hoped. Maybe you snapped, or stayed silent when you wanted to speak. Maybe you replayed it for days. But what if, instead of reliving the past, you used it to refine your future? That's the Stoic way, not perfection but preparation. They knew emotions would rise. They knew failure would visit. But they also knew the soul strengthens not in avoiding the storm, but in learning how to sail through it with steadier hands. And repetition is your training. Each time you revisit the same pain with a little more compassion, you're healing. Each time you face the same flaw with a little more honesty, you're growing. Each time you move through the same chaos with a little more calm, you're embodying wisdom, not memorizing it. That's the strange comfort of Stoic thought. It never asks you to be done, only to continue, to practice, to persist, to choose again. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "You always own the option of having no opinion." And how powerful that is. You don't have to react. You don't have to be drawn into the same argument, the same outrage, the same internal storm. You can see it rise and let it pass. Like watching a wave crest and break without needing to dive into it. You remember a time you did that, don't you? When someone said something that once would have triggered you, but this time you paused, you breathed, you responded slowly. That was growth, not loud, not impressive, but real. You didn't escape the repetition, you transformed within it. That's what's happening now. Each time the same moment appears, it's not a test of endurance. It's a mirror asking, how will you meet this now? Not how you met it before, not how someone else might, but how you in this version of yourself will respond. And you know the way. You've walked it before. You will walk it again, not in circles, but in spirals, rising gently toward your better self. It's getting late. Not just the time on the clock, but the kind of late that lives in the body. That soft weight in your limbs. The way thoughts begin to unravel at the edges. The way your breath naturally slows even if you're not trying. And here in this softness you sense something beneath the repetition. Not fatigue, but freedom. Because something else begins to fade too. That relentless pressure to be productive. That constant chase of what's next. That itch for stimulation, validation, improvement. All of it. Loosening. The Stoics spoke often about freedom, but not the kind most people imagine, not political, not even physical. They meant inner freedom. The ability to move through life untouched by things outside your control. A serenity that isn't shaken by fortune or fear. And how do you reach it? Not by doing more, but by detaching from what doesn't belong to you. You begin to feel it now. A lightness. Like setting down a heavy coat you didn't realize you were wearing. And it surprises you, doesn't it? How much you've carried. How many invisible burdens ride along with you each day. Expectations. Old comparisons. Imagined futures. Regrets that don't even sting anymore but still echo quietly in the background. And yet when you return to the same stillness again and again, something shifts. Repetition becomes a process of shedding. Not adding, not collecting, but letting go. You think of the Stoic slave-turned-teacher Epictetus. He had nothing, owned nothing. And yet he was free, because no one could make him value what he had already discarded in his mind. That's the kind of freedom repetition brings. You stop reaching for things that used to matter. You see through illusions that once controlled you. You find yourself craving less and appreciating more. It's a strange kind of wealth, and it grows not with effort, but with return. You remember a moment, quiet and uneventful, when you realized you didn't need to win the argument, or prove your worth, or fix what someone else thought was wrong with you. You just breathed, and it was enough. that was freedom. And the more you taste it, the more your life changes, not on the outside but deep within. You begin to choose peace over being right, presence over performance, silence over noise. You stop rehearsing who you should be and start resting in who you already are. That, too, is repetition, not as a grind, but as grace. The Stoics didn't promise a life without hardship. They didn't promise comfort, but they promised clarity if you stayed close to what you could control and let the rest move through you like wind through trees. Tonight, the wind is soft. The thoughts are quieter now. You're not forcing peace. You're allowing it. And in doing so, you glimpse something rare. Freedom not as a place you reach, but as the rhythm you return to, again and again, until it becomes not something you practice, but something you are. The night has deepened. The kind of deep where the world feels softer, gentler, and strangely vast. Fewer cars outside, fewer thoughts inside, just a steady quiet like a lake undisturbed. You're here again. You've returned. And now, in this final stretch of stillness, you begin to notice something beautiful about the rhythm of repetition. It doesn't just shape your thoughts or actions, it slowly, subtly reshapes your being. Not by force, but by trust. By showing up over and over to the same breath, the same question, the same moment. You begin to feel the scaffolding of a new kind of life. One built not on grand events, but on quiet constancy. One that doesn't need to prove anything, because it's rooted in something deeper than achievement. Presence. You think of the Stoics writing by candlelight, alone, perhaps weary but faithful, not to an audience, not to perfection, but to the work. The inner work, the labor of clarity, acceptance, virtue, a lifetime of circling back to the basics. What is mine to control? What kind of person do I want to be? What am I choosing right now? These questions don't wear out with time. They deepen. And so does your answer, not by becoming more clever, but by becoming more true. You smile now, a gentle smile, not because everything is solved, but because you're not asking life to be different tonight. You're not wrestling the unknown. You're sitting with it, breathing with it, maybe even befriending it. This is the final paradox, isn't it? That repetition, the very thing we once feared would dull us, has refined us. You're more present now than when this journey began, not because the world has changed, but because you have softened into it, more aware, more at peace, more whole. And maybe the freedom you've sought all along wasn't in escaping the loop, but in moving through it awake. And now, as we bring this long meditation to its close, you can feel the story dimming like the final flickers of a fire. You've circled your thoughts. You've walked old paths with new eyes. You've practiced letting go over and over until even the need to try begins to fade. The room is still. Your mind is soft. Your heart is quiet. And you are right where you need to be. No striving, no seeking. Just this, just now, just breath. The rhythm is still there. The journey still unfolding. But for now, you rest. And as the edges of thought begin to blur and drift, you let yourself go gently into the night, into the peace you've been building. One gentle return at a time. You're still here. Softened now like moonlight on a quiet sea. The thoughts have slowed. The breath is easy. And somewhere between this sentence and the last, you've forgotten what needed to be fixed. That's the hidden magic of repetition. Not to achieve more, but to surrender more. To return so often that returning itself becomes a kind of arrival. You're no longer chasing stillness. You're resting in it. The Stoics knew that peace wasn't earned. It was remembered. It was returned to like a favorite place within the self. A quiet chamber where the noise of the world fades and the soul can breathe. You're there now, and you can come back whenever you wish. That's the gift of this practice. It doesn't vanish when the session ends. It lingers. It folds into your days, into your pauses, into your way of being. So as you begin to drift now, feel that peace settle deeper. No effort, no expectation. Only the rhythm of your breath. Only the weight of your body supported, cradled, safe. You've walked a long road tonight, not in distance, but in depth. And now you arrive not with triumph, but with tranquility. Let the mind fade. Let the body rest. You are home.